Now's the time for a great deal on a new Honda. It's time to take an adventure with rugged capability and commanding style. Check out the Honda Ridgeline, Pilot, or CR-V. For a limited time, well-qualified buyers can get a 3.99% APR on a 2025 Pilot, a 1.99% APR on a 2025 Ridgeline, or a 2.99% APR on a 2025 CR-V.
See dealer for financing details.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 308. And this is going to be, I think this going to post sometime in the mid-April, right, Andrew?
I don't know. Probably. I just work day by day.
Okay. I am your host, Heather McDaniel-McDevitt. And today I'm joined by Andrew Kinkella down in Southern California.
And as always, it is such a pleasure to be on this show.
Yes. The reoccurring guest that never left.
That's right. No, I know. That's basically true. That's basically true. I've just so overstayed my welcome. You're like, couch guy, can you please go somewhere else?
I keep you around because you're funny and because you have, I don't know, a good sense of humor and a good attitude. It's always nice.
That's right. That's all I'm used for. Nobody ever takes me seriously. They never go, oh, look at this PhD archaeologist. Let me ask him about archaeology. No, it's just for laughs. Oh, yeah, I know. Ugh, whatever. Why don't I have any self-respect is what I want to know. It's just, I just don't.
Well, I have a tremendous amount of respect for you, Andrew. This is the what do you call it? The Mutual Admiration Society.
It is the Mutual Admiration Club.
Speaking of perspective, I don't know. That wasn't a very good segue, but we're going to.
I think it kicked ass.
There you go. All right.
Yeah.
So today we're going to just, unfortunately, this is going to kind of time the podcast, but we are recording today on March 9th, 2025. And the hours changed. And you know what? Here's the thing is when people say that we're so centric, US centric, right? It didn't even occur to me that Doug in Scotland doesn't have a daylight savings time, right? So he thought we weren't going to be recording. So until another hour. And
I blame him. That's all.
Well,
he needs to know. He's an American citizen.
That's true.
He should know. Yeah.
So it's just Andrew. Folks, you have just me and Andrew.
That's right.
So we're just going to go through some of the, relevant topics that are happening right now. And I know that, there's a lot of loathing, fear and loathing, I guess, out there. And my concern, because, our discipline has gone through different phases of this. And I've met a lot of people that maybe 15 years ago went through a phase where all the academics were telling them they're not going to have a job when they leave, which is really weird to me because they're in your classes to learn and you're telling them they're learning, but they're not going to have a job. It was such a weird thing. But
yeah.
And people gave up. Young people just graduated, had their bachelors, mainly the people with bachelors. They gave up and they went into other disciplines. And I don't think they had the perspective that they could have had because there's a lot of people that have really good jobs in this discipline, making decent money. Mm-hmm. And I know that's not the case necessarily in the beginning, although I was very fortunate. I ended up on a federal job, and it was made good money. It was one of my first jobs, right? So I just my concern is that we have people that have, they're just newly graduated, they're new to this business, and they say, you know what, they listen to everything that's going on social media and otherwise, and they give up on the discipline. And so I think that the topic we decided, Andrew and I were thinking the topic that would be nice would be perspective. Let's look at the current state of things And really, what do we know? Not what we fear is going to happen, but what do we really know?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I'm going to sound like everyone's grandma right now, but it's the don't borrow trouble situation, right? It's
like
just,
yeah.
it's true. It's like, yes, there are some ominous things, there's some scary things, totally. But you got to look at the facts. It's not just like, oh my God, it's going to be so bad. It's going to be so bad. Okay, just wait, take a breath.
Let the dust settle.
Yeah. And then look at what has actually happened. Or this is another one I've seen again and again. It's like, maybe actually read the law, or read the executive order. There's all this freaking out, and then nobody actually looks at the facts, right? I thought our interview with Spencer, the last time or two, was so great, because this is Spencer Pelton, the Wyoming State archaeologist, because he, it's his job to deal with the facts. And I thought it was so enlightening, it's like, here's the facts and let's talk about them. So that would be my sort of first hope for people. Just like, hey man, don't freak out. Don't look at the social media posts, because social media is just full of like, oh, the sky is falling. It's like, wait for yourself, the sort of do your own research, read the actual executive orders, and really figure out how they relate to you.
And, some great points, Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
Another, I went through graduate school. Again, this is my second career. And so I was older, so I had probably maybe more maturity or whatever. So I had a little bit more perspective just because of life experience. But, when I was going through graduate school, there was a lot of you're never going to find a job type of attitude. And I know a lot of people that gave up on it and they missed out. So it's, when you look at, let's say, markets, right? When the stocks go down, that's when a lot of people make money, right? Is when they buy low. And now the opportunity, and not that we're at a low state really, but this is an opportunity for you to make your mark. This is an opportunity for you to start looking at things differently. And so when I entered CRM, I looked at things from a different perspective. And I've actually had a good career because of the fact that I didn't look at it like everybody else. And so, and everybody can do that. Everybody can contribute in that manner.
You were saying that it's not really a low, and you're right, but it's a perceived low. And that can be the best, even in terms of the stock market. You're basically have stocks that are undervalued. It can be the same thing with like a CRM job. Oh, there's nothing there. Oh, no, it's all going. Oh, it's all crashing. Yeah, maybe it's not. And that's the time. That's the time to buy.
Yeah. Yep. So let's buy into our CRM. And with that, we're going to make some short segments today. With that, we're going to go on to our next segment.
Cool.
We'll be right back.
Now's the time for a great deal on a new Honda. It's time to take an adventure with rugged capability and commanding style. Check out the Honda Ridgeline, Pilot, or CRV. For a limited time, well-qualified buyers can get a 3.99% APR on a 2025 Pilot, 1.99% APR on a 2025 Ridgeline, or a 2.99% APR on a 2025 CRV.
See dealer for financing details.
Welcome back to CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 308. We are talking about all the changes going on in our discipline and trying to just maybe, give some perspective, especially to people that are new to CRM.
Yeah. And I'm thinking like, what if I'm a new to CRM archaeologist? I've just graduated and I hear all this doom and gloom. Heather, I'm wondering, what would you say to me? The opposite of those professors who are like, there's no jobs in CRM. You got nothing. The sky's falling. There's nothing for you. Live under a bridge. What would you say to me on the flip side?
Well, I would say right now, not that you don't have any control over, but you don't. Okay. You only have control over your own life, and you only have control over what you have control over, right? So let's focus on what you have control over.
Yeah.
And what you have control over as a new person in CRM is showing up for work, making just like you would have before, when there was this concept that there was plentiful work, which I have news for you if you're new to CRM. This is always CRM archaeologists can be very much doom and gloom. So this is just the new flavor of doom and gloom. So you have to write it out. And as you work, you'll start getting perspective. Have an open mind, be a hard worker, show up when you say you're going to show up, be that person who's willing to be Johnny on the spot. And I'll tell you, that kind of leads into another topic. You know, in this business, there's a lot of stop and go, hurry up and wait, right? And we have a job that's going to happen, and then we find out the day before it's not going to happen. And it's not just because of weather. There's, permitting, there's, jobs starting are so reliant on so many different people doing their jobs right that a lot of times, projects get canceled or projects get postponed, the work gets postponed. And unfortunately, for people who are hourly or as needed, that impacts whether or not you make money. And so, just being steady, being dependable, just control what you can control. If you do that, I guarantee you're going to be a lot further off than you will be if you have this doom and gloom attitude and try to focus on what other people tell you is going to happen. So just focus on what you can control. The other thing is, one good, and we've mentioned this in other podcasts, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, where there was a lot of money pumped into cities and counties and for infrastructure improvements, right? What they call capital projects. That money has been already sent. And that is a pipeline of work that is going to keep going. So that is, especially if you're working in states where the regulations like California and New York, Washington, Oregon, to some degree, they're state. And I really think, I'd love to put together a spreadsheet of which states have more, state level regulations that guarantee work. But for the time being, I'm just popping off some of them. And so that work is still there. I really don't think that if we are going to feel anything, I don't think we're going to feel anything for a few years. So I think that people right now just need to focus on what is right in front of them and just do your work. I mean, it's much healthier for you than looking and all this fear and loathing of what might happen. Leave that up to the people that actually have been in this business for a long time. That's not to say that new people in the business can't have an impact. Of course you can, but you have an impact where you really reasonably can have an impact. And that is on the day-to-day grind, doing your work, showing up with a good attitude, and allowing those that, like associations, like CRM companies, like professional associations, to fight that fight for you guys. That is happening. If you're on LinkedIn, try to follow some of these associations so that you can keep updated on what their efforts are with the current, federal and state administrations, where people are fighting for archaeologists and to ensure that, that preservation is still going to be a part of the permitting process for projects. So, and that actually might make you feel better because that people are fighting on that side. So to me, I think control what you can control.
Yeah. And Heather, have you seen specific things that the associations have been doing?
Yeah. So even in the last few years, there have been some things that have happened in California that have been impacting California archaeology. And so there's the Society of California Archaeology that has been speaking in front of legislatures and really fighting for, preservation laws, fighting for the archaeologist's role in preservation. And I'm not going to get into that, but there have been some roadblocks that have been put in front of CRM in California archaeology. And so people that have been in this business for a long time have the perspective. They've seen things come and go. They've seen, these laws be enacted, and then they've seen the pitfalls of actually having to act on some of these laws. And so they had the perspective and the ability to speak more intelligently about it. So the SCAs have been working with lawmakers and in concert with tribes and thepos. So yeah. And then there are, I know, the SAAs, ACRA. There are these more nationwide associations that have been speaking up on behalf of archaeologists and on behalf of preservation in general, including architectural historians.
Right. That's cool. I've always been a fan of the SCAs, right? The California Archaeology one, and the smaller, more regional archaeology groups, because for my money, they do real stuff. When it comes to the national level, like the SAAs and especially the AAAs, to me, they're like so divorced from reality. What they'll do is nothing, and then they'll write a strongly worded letter, to somewhere and be like, our society is very aghast and against what's happening. And then they don't do anything. They actually don't do anything. They think that their like strongly worded letter is more than enough. And it's like, you guys, you gotta, put some more effort into this. So it's so heartening. Huh?
Agreed. I agree with you. And there are some of those letters that are happening. And there's one that came out and I was like, okay, what did you think you were going to accomplish with this letter?
I know. It's like, okay, you've had your little tantrum. Now what's the next?
Waving the finger. But there's an association, for those that may not know, called ACRA. It's American Cultural Resources Association. Yeah.
Oh, right.
And so they deal with actual CRM. This is an association that CRM firms belong to. And so I think theirs is more of a very specific direction in what they are trying to accomplish. And they have a perspective. So, a lot of these like SAA and the AAAs are very academia oriented, where ACRA is the professional side of things.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I just really like that. I feel no closeness especially to the AAAs. The AAAs are the ones that I hammer on incessantly, because it's like, please live in the real world for 2 seconds.
It doesn't. I haven't belonged to a AAA since I was in school.
Oh, me neither. It's been like a decade or more. Every so often, I like just look at their posts. I'm like, oh, good Lord. But anyway, enough of my complaints. Like, what else? We're trying to give some perspective to this kind of stuff.
Okay, so let's look at like impacts to funding.
Good. Yeah.
What is it really? As far as funding goes, so okay, first we have to kind of take it down the line. First, what's the first thing that happened that everybody got upset about? The executive orders, right? The executive orders were to streamline the process and to take away undue obstacles in the way of energy projects, right?
Yeah.
So there's nothing in these executive orders that say we are going to abolish NEPA. Right. There was nothing in there that said that. So if you thought that, and honestly, I know this seems really ridiculous, but with some of the things that you see on social media and some of the just interactions that people have had that I've seen in person, you would have thought that that's what these executive orders said.
Yes, I think most people do. I think most people think that.
That's not what happened. So
that's our point. It's like, read the thing, see what it actually is. Yeah, it does not say that.
And whether or not the Trump administration is looking at it from this perspective that I'm just about to say or not. Okay.
Right.
The process to get projects ready to move forward is obscene. It is obscene. Yeah, and so I think, let's look at this. Let's look at how does that affect archaeologists? So there's a lot of archaeologists, right, that are employed as needed. Okay. Yeah. So, and, we can touch on that a little bit. Everybody says, well, we need to get away from that, but there are reasons for that. So we do have as needed. We have hourly people, even if somebody's working and they're working hourly part-time, right? They have benefits. They're working regularly, 32 hours a week or whatever. But the fact that we have such protracted and irregular processes to get a project to the start line, not even to the finish line, but to the start line.
Yeah.
Impacts people's ability to make money. For anybody who's listening right now, who has either works as needed now or has in the past, how many times have you been called where you were ready to go Monday morning and you get an email on Sunday or a text Sunday evening saying we're postponed for whatever reason it is? It just happened to me. It just happened to me. I had a project. I was supposed to be flying out of the SCAs, flying out of San Francisco, going back east to do a project. And all of a sudden, a permit just got dropped. We were supposed to start on Monday and we can't start now because we got another 4-week permitting process that I can't tell you how many permitting processes this project has had to go through. And, so this is not something, to me, if this is going to be fixed, or at least going to get a little bit closer to being more reasonable, I think it's a good thing for archaeology.
Yeah, I get that. I don't tell my students, oh, there's no jobs for you. But I do tell my students, hey, look, the first job you get, don't be worried when you get that call on Sunday night that says, hey, guys, we're not starting for another 3 weeks, because we have all experienced that. I mean, every job I was ever on was that. I'd be shocked if I had a single job that actually started on the start date. I don't think I have.
It's really upset to me, the one that has to make that call or the one that has to ask somebody else to make that call or whatever. It's upsetting to me because I know what that means. Yeah. I know that person that's getting the phone call is like, oh, great, 3 weeks. How am I going to make, I took this job and said no to this other job. And now how am I going to make the money to pay my rent, to pay my other bills, right? Yeah. So I think if there can be, and it is ridiculous. It's a combination of things. It is a process where, government people that work in the government, there's a lot of great people that work in the government, but I mean, the old adage of centered around DMV, right? Where you're just going to sit there all day.
Yeah.
Or any other kind of government agency that you need a service from. It's people say that because it's true. So if we can minimize these, the lack of regularity and response times, I think it's going to be a good thing for people in this business. And maybe it's going to hurt in the meantime, but if we can have a much more efficient process, then I think in the long run it's going to be a good thing.
Yeah, I'm hoping so too.
All right. So we're going to go on to segment 3. We'll be right back.
Now's the time for a great deal on a new Honda. It's time to take an adventure with rugged capability and commanding style. Check out the Honda Ridgeline, Pilot, or CRV. For a limited time, well-qualified buyers can get a 3.99% APR on a 2025 Pilot, 1.99% APR on a 2025 Ridgeline, or a 2.99% APR on a 2025 CRV.
See dealer for financing details.
Welcome back, everyone, to CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 308. And this is our third and last segment. And today we're talking about maybe having some perspective in these tumultuous times, as people would say. And Andrew, do you have any questions?
I have so many questions. I do like that we're keeping it to the perspective of like, hey, you're in CRM, you see all these laws, you're freaking out. And again, as we said in the last segment, if I was just a regular old, CRM, if I was myself when I was like 27 years old or something, I would have thought that all the laws have been disbanded, that there's just no hope for CRM. I would have thought that all companies could just build oil rigs wherever they want. And that doesn't make me stupid. For those of you listening, if you think that doesn't mean you're foolish or something. It's just you're inundated with this social media freak out stuff. And I feel so bad that it's so difficult to actually get just real facts basic information, some way to just go through this in some sort of scientific, thoughtful manner instead of just the freak out fest. So, and I know it's difficult when you see all this to divorce yourself from it and not be worried. I mean, I think we're all worried, but try not to be so worried. Try not to let all that social media stuff gin you up, into some sort of fright, because, man, it's one step at a time. And I haven't seen, on my side, like anything horrendously severe, I guess I would say maybe in the academic world, or how academics is related to some of this. I'm sure that, some of my colleagues would be like, what, you haven't? What do you mean? But maybe some of the more like esoteric, like funding situations and stuff. And I'm not here to say that I'm pro getting rid of funding or something like that. Not at all. What I'm here to say is, as of right now, I haven't seen like massive people out of jobs on breadlines or something, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't, first of all, the funding, yeah, there has been some. Right now, we don't know where that's going. Okay. Right. So as of March 9th, we don't know where that's going. We do know that there have been cuts. There have been cuts to, workforce, but this is not uncommon. I mean, we talked about this in the last podcast. I mean, Clinton made huge cuts in his administration, right off the bat. He cut the government workforce by a lot. I mean, hundreds of thousands of positions, right?
Yeah.
Were cut. So, this is not new.
Yeah. Even though President Clinton did a lot of this as well, we're not saying like, oh, well, since Clinton did it, everything's cool. You should be fine on the breadline, not at all. And, when it comes to stuff like hot button issues like USAID, I do think that that's, foolish. I've worked a little bit with USAID, and I've found them to be a very, worthwhile organization, very neutral, if that makes sense. Just there basically to help people internationally. So. Yeah, so I want people to know that we're not here just to be like, oh, yeah, all cuts are good. Just deal with it. Everyone does it. But I think our point is more like, look at what's actually happened and don't borrow trouble.
Well, and I love that. Don't borrow trouble. It's such a great phrase. As far as USAID, there's a lot of good, right, that has happened. Mm-hmm. But two things can be true at the same time.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So they've done good things, but people have taken advantage of that program.
Totally. And it's an easy one to take advantage of,
Exactly. Because why?
Yeah.
If you're doing things that are nefarious, or you're doing things that are corrupt, of course you're going to hide behind something considered good, right? That's like the perfect cloak for doing something corrupt. So, if you have a good entity or a good action, right? You want it to be as pure and clean as possible. So cleaning this up is not a bad thing. And I'd like to say the same thing. People have been talking about this since, even before the Chevron decision, right? Right. But the Chevron decision, which we've talked about, and you can see some information on Spencer Pelton's Social Stigma Substack, do a little digging into that. People were going, okay, we need to codify some of these, our discipline a lot better than it is right now because it's precarious. And there were, decisions that were made, whether they were made for corrupt reasons or they were made just to put a Band-Aid on an issue, but they were not substantiated or they weren't supported by good, sound, lawful actions. And eventually it was going to topple. So it's, again, of course we don't want NEPA to disappear, but I have not seen one executive order that says that that's happening. So let's deal with
so important
that are in front of us. And, the one thing that people need to understand is the difference between NEPA and the exercising of NEPA and the Council of Environmental Quality. And that is what's being impacted right now, is that there was an entity that was regulating how NEPA happened on a federal side. And the way in which that happened, and if you want to get a little bit more, background on it, just Google it, actually, or you can look at Spencer's social stigma. And we're not. I promise.
But Heather, can you give like a thumbnail sketch of that? Because I think that stuff is really interesting, and I don't understand all of that. Like when it comes to some of the the nitty gritty of some of the things you're talking about. So I think that's very cool. Okay,
so the Council of Environmental Quality was established as part of within the executive branch to oversee the process of how environmental assessments, EISs, EAs, categorical exclusions would be produced, these documents. So these documents are created in order to assess environment altering project. What is this major project going to impact the environment, just in a real broad sense? And this Council of Environmental Quality, even though it was within the executive branch, did not have the checks and balances that it needed to have. And so it was working, even though within the executive branch, there was no checks and balances from the administration, whatever that current administration was.
Gotcha.
And so because of that, some of the decisions that they would make, or the regulations and determinations that they would make, and how these documents would be created, although maybe some of them were good and they helped maybe streamline processes, there was no control from the administration that would be in charge. And so when that happens, what could happen is, and listen, people could say, okay, I don't like the current administration. Okay. But what if what happens with the administration you do like, and the actions that they do, just remember, we see this as just an echoing back and forth. The current administration does something. When the next opposing administration comes in, they go and take from the playbook of the previous administration, the opposite administration. So whatever is good for the goose is good for the gander. And so having this Council of Environmental Quality within the executive branch that wasn't answerable to the current administration is a problem. So that is what is being affected right now. That is they're not disbanding NEPA. They're targeted on the Council of Environmental Quality.
Okay. Yeah. See, stuff like that. Yeah. I didn't understand. See, I don't even know the intricacies of that. So I find that really fascinating. Like, okay. So now they had these directives, or these ways of implementing the regulations. So now these regulations still exist. NEPA still exists, right? It's just what is the process? How are the regulations going to be exercised, right? Okay. And so now this is going back to, okay, so this is your edict with the regulations, and each one of the departments now have to make a decision on what they're going to do. Now, a lot of these departments already have processes. So it's not like it went back to the individual departments and agencies to come up with a process. They already have it. Right. And if they didn't have one, which I don't think there's many of them, if they didn't have one, then they can create one, or they can default to the CEQ, the ones that were there, right? But they have to have it as part of their process, rather than it happening from this over umbrella, the umbrella agency, or not agency, the umbrella organization of the CEQ. So in those states that already, or in those agencies, that already have a process, I don't see that there's going to be much of a change. Yeah. Again, I think there should be some changes. I think if nothing else, the bright side of this could be that we start realizing that there needs to be some, agencies need to clean up their process. Right. Because
now this idea of, having processes from agencies and then having the CEQ processes, it muddies the water. The more people, the more hands that you have in the pot, the muddier.
I believe what you're trying to say is too many chefs spoil the kitchen.
Yes. Yes. Well, they don't get food out of the kitchen. That's for sure. So I think that, I think for me, I think it may seem painful in the meantime, although honestly, for the everyday archaeologist that's just showing up and doing a survey, doing a data
this is what matters.
It's not going to impact you. Like these kinds of regulations have nothing to do with you. These kinds of regulations they have something to do with, they actually in some ways don't even have anything to do with how a work plan is created.
Right.
Only in some areas, like, if you have certain kind of permits or sediment erosion, plans that you have to put together, those kinds of things that you have to have extra processes. But for the most part, the person who's writing the work plan might be affected. But even then, I don't think it's affected all that much. Right. You have a work plan in front of you. It's been given by whoever hired you. That is what you're going to do. And right now, I think, just to kind of wrap up this podcast, the money is there's still a lot of money in the pipeline. There's still a lot of projects in the pipeline first.
Right.
The people that were in states that didn't have state triggers, you still had the same situation. I mean, there were people that work in states like Georgia, let's say, right, that don't have a whole lot of required preservation processes, right? Yeah. So the only time that you'd have to do work would be, no, I shouldn't say the only time, but many times the work is triggered by any kind of federal trigger. You have it's the same situation. So, and as far as they say, well, they just want to remove it for energy projects. I was on a project for an energy project, a wind turbine project. It took them 20 years and 3 separate ownership groups to get it over the finish line. That's ridiculous. Yep. I mean, you think about that. I guarantee you, we were hired, the company I was working for were hired by the last ownership group that actually was able to get it over the finish line. But think about all those people that were working for companies that for those first 2 ownership groups where it never went all the way through.
Yeah.
That all the work that they had been ready to do that kept getting pulled back and pulled off. And then finally they sell the project as a package of what has happened so far. So they didn't even own property, right? But they were selling the project. Okay, we've gotten it halfway through the process. We're going to sell it to the next person and they're going to try to get it the next half. But there were a lot of people who ended up not getting work done. And it's that process, these unduly protracted processes that are bane of some of our existence and as archaeologists. And I think that if people were just to look at this from the other side of things, I really think that in the long run, this could be a good thing. I do think good things are going to come from this. So
I hope so too. And I agree with you on that. I mean, the Egyptians built a pyramid in 20 years, you know what I mean? Like just in comparison. And what I also say to people in terms of all this sort of upheaval, I'm like, look, besides not borrowing trouble, also let's revisit this in like 6 months. You know what I mean? To see what the actual fallout is. Of a lot of this, what actually happens, how much of this goes through the court system and this kind of stuff. And then, what are we actually left with, in several months from now?
One, little bit of happiness, I guess. I'm seeing a lot of posts for jobs on the state level.
Oh, me too.
Yeah. So, don't like concede to this and just think, it's over for me, right? Listen, this is not an easy discipline, right? And if anything worth going after isn't going to be easy, it isn't. So if you really enjoy your passion, your passion is archaeology, you really want to make a go of it, it's difficult for anyone, right? In this business. So, and it didn't start on January 20th. It was difficult before that. So
it sure was. Yeah.
Take up the gauntlet, keep working at it, keep improving your skills, keep putting the resumes and the cover letters out there, extend yourself to, writing emails and making that extra step, all these things that we've said on other podcasts as far as getting a job. Like, keep at it. You will find a job. There is work out there. And you know what? If you're listening to this podcast and this gives you inspiration to do that, great. For those that quit, that means more work for you. So
yep.
Just keep at it. It's not as bad as you think. We'll make it through this together. And with that, we'll bid adieu, and we'll see you next time.
See you guys next time.
That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archpodnet.com/CRMArchPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at archpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye. The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Now's the time for a great deal on a new Honda. It's time to take an adventure with rugged capability and commanding style. Check out the Honda Ridgeline, Pilot, or CRV. For a limited time, well-qualified buyers can get a 3.99% APR on a 2025 Pilot, 1.99% APR on a 2025 Ridgeline, or a 2.99% APR on a 2025 CRV.
See dealer for financing details.